we're saying with movement, we have two different types of movement, two things to consider. And with range of motion, what we want to do is think about all of the components that are associated with the movement. The same way, and I use this example all the time, and I don't know anything about cars, so if you do, you're gonna realize I don't know anything. If something is wrong with the braking system of my car, I take it to the mechanic. The mechanic doesn't just take off my wheel and say, we're going to change your brake pads. That makes no sense. How do you know the brake pads are a problem? He doesn't just say, we're going to change your rotors. What do? They take off my wheel, they inspect my wheel. They inspect my brake pads. They inspect my rotors. They inspect the whole braking system. And what does a mechanic do? They find a problematic part, they'll either repair it or they'll replace it. Does that make sense? They can only do that after inspecting the whole braking system to decide what is the problem here. Okay. Movement, think of it the same way. If we understand all parts of the movement, I understand the brakes, I understand the rotors, I understand the brake lines, I understand all that stuff. I understand muscle contraction, muscle lengthening, joint movement, component motion, then I can really assess range of motion. So first we're saying is we have two things with movement. We have voluntary movement, physiological movement, that's the name of it, physiological movement. Physiological movement is voluntary movement of synovial joints in their cardinal planes. I voluntarily flex my shoulder. I voluntarily flex my hip. I voluntarily extend my knee. And these happen in the cardinal planes. This flexion is a sagittal plane movement, sagittal plane, or coronal plane or frontal plane, whatever you want to call it. Bottom line is I voluntarily make those movements happen. Cool? Then we would think naturally, well, if someone comes in and they can't abduct their shoulder this high, why? First thing we tend to go to is muscles. We're muscle people. If the shoulder abductors are weak, can it stop the movement short? That's one of the variables. Yeah, if they're weak, you might not be able to produce enough force that will elevate the limb against gravity through full ROM. So that could be a reason why this stops short. We agree? All right, muscles again. I've got muscles that elongate when I do this movement. Latissimus dorsi elongates, teres major elongates, coracobrachialis. In other words, all the shoulder adductors elongate. If any of them don't have the ability to elongate properly, can it stop the movement short? Absolutely. These are variables that we need to go assess. But so that's going to be associated with the physiological movement. But we also have this other thing that we said, accessory movement. Accessory movement is involuntary. So we have these things that are involuntarily moving. I don't control them. Cool? And of these involuntary movements, they're broken into two categories. Something called component motion. Component motion is movement of other joints that I don't control. And then the other part of that is arthrokinematics, the swings, the rolls, the slides at the joint, right? The joint play stuff. Let's go to component motion first. During this GH abduction, what else is happening? I control this. I don't control the elevation of the lateral end of my clavicle that comes from my SC joints during this movement. I don't control that. That happens involuntarily. That's component motion that occurs during a GH abduction. If this movement at the SC joint is problematic, it can cause problems for the shoulder joint to move properly. Does that make sense? We also have other component motion, for example, scapular rotation. During this GH abduction, I also have the scapula that does an upward rotation. I don't control the upward rotation. I control the GH abduction. The GH abduction in part is reliant on the scapular rotation to allow for the full GH abduction. If this scapular rotation is limited, therefore I might see GH abduction being limited. Does that make sense? Component motion. So those are part of the involuntary things. And the other part of the involuntary things is the swings, rolls, and slides, the sliding of the bone at the surface. Does that make sense to you guys? Do you guys at home remember the convex concave rule and that stuff? Yay, nay? You guys doing here?
I don't think I know what you're talking about.
Okay, let's do this then. So when we're talking about joints and how they move, we heard you use it. When we're talking about joints and how they move, the bony interaction, the interaction between two bony articulating surfaces, this is called arthrokinematics, okay? Or very loosely called joint play. Cool? So these are involuntary things. We're saying these two bony articulating surfaces do involuntary things against each other. The involuntary things that they do are three things. One of them is called a roll. Like a ball on the ground, I push it like this and it rolls. Does that make sense? So one bony partner will roll against the other, will roll against the other. We also have something called a slide, like a box that I push on the floor. It's a linear translatory movement. One of these bony structures will linear translate, or linear translate, or linear translate. It's a sliding movement. And another movement that happens is called a spin. It is a rotation around a central axis, like the odontoid process of C2 and the anterior arch of C1. And C1 will rotate around the axis created by the odontoid process or the dens of C2. Are we cool with this? When these things happen inside of the joint space, they're involuntary. When we have issues with any of these, this guy is the problem. Cool? It's not sliding properly. And by proper, we're simply saying it's not sliding to the magnitude or the depth or the distance that it needs to produce movement. When we look at a joint capsule that is overstretched, how do we know it's overstretched? Because we have excessive amounts of movement. Bring your arm way up here, excessive amounts of movement. Because why does that happen? Because the bones can slide further in a given direction. So the opposite is true. When the joint capsule is restricted and the bones cannot slide very far, we end up with a limitation in movement. So our slide becomes a major problem when it comes to movement. So we now need to understand where things slide. Cool? This takes you to our convex-concave rule. The only purpose of the convex-concave rule is to tell you where things slide. That's it. It has no other purpose. It tells you where things slide. Are we cool so far? So the convex-concave rule says this. If you have a bony surface that is convex in shape, and it's moving, then it will slide opposite to where it rolls. That's not supposed to make any sense right now. Okay, that's normal right now. I just want you to commit it to memory. If the bony structure is convex in shape, it will slide opposite to where it rolls. Are we cool with this idea? If the bony structure is concave in shape, it'll slide in the same direction to where it rolls. And like I said, you're supposed to say, dude, I thought we were talking about slide, and now for me to understand slide, I need to understand roll. So let's understand roll. And we'll start it like this. Roll is equal to something called swing. Roll is equal to something called swing. Are we cool so far? If something rolls anteriorly, where does it swing? Anteriorly, because it's equal to. Same, right? If something swings posteriorly, where does it roll? Posterior, right? Swing and roll, same. Cool? All right. Swing and roll are the same. Let's take a look at the concept of swing then. And whatever I get from swing, roll is going to be the same. Look at the child's playground. Literally the swing at a child's playground. There's the chain and there's the seat. The child's playground swings back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, right? Well, what if it's not a child's playground? What if it's your humerus, your elbow joint, and your radius in a lateral view? And this is anterior, and this is posterior. Whoa, you mean my elbow joint swings like that? Just like the child's playground? Or if this is a knee joint, that's a femur, that's a tibia, that's anterior, posterior, extension, flexion? What? If there's a shoulder joint, and I'm facing you, and that's abduction, adduction, or I'm facing this way, it's flexion, extension. In other words, your joints swing too, like the child's playground. They don't swing back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. Your joints swing in an anatomical direction. When I flex my elbow, it swings in an anatomical direction. It swings anteriorly. And then when I extend my elbow, it swings in an anatomical direction. It swings posteriorly. In other words, where does the limb move? And that tells you where it swings. So I flex my elbow from here to here. That's an anterior swing. If I keep flexing it, it's now superior swing. If I extend it from this position, that's an inferior swing. Now it's a posterior swing. If I flex my GH, here's an anterior swing. Now it's a superior swing. Now it's an inferior swing. Now it's a posterior swing. the direction that the moving bone goes in. I can see swing. I cannot see the roll of the bone inside the joint capsule, but the swing and roll are the same. As a matter of fact, the swing is nothing more than an extension of the roll. Imagine my body is the head of the humerus, and this is the shaft of the humerus. If the head of the humerus rolls to the right, where's the shaft go? To the right. If the head of the humerus rolls to the left, where's the shaft go? To the left. If the head of the humerus rolls superiorly, where's the shaft go? Superiorly. They're the same. Now we can apply the rule no problem, because you use the term roll in the definition of the convex concave rule to determine where things slide. Now I understand roll. So let's go back to our rule. The rule says if I have a convex surface moving, this bone will slide opposite to where it rolls. So if I can see where it swings, I know where it rolls, I can tell you what's opposite. So during a flexion movement of the shoulder to 90 degrees, it's an anterior swing, convex surface, anterior swing, anterior roll. Convex surface, the rule says convex bone moving, opposite direction slide to the roll. Posterior slide during a flexion. I get it. Superior swing, superior roll, convex surface, opposite, inferior slide. I get it. That is joint mobilizations. If you answer 3 or 4 questions right every time, you will never screw up a joint mob. And these are your 3 or 4 questions. What are the 2 bones that make up the joint? What is the shape of the moving bone? Apply the rule. Let's take anywhere. Let's take the elbow. What are the 2 bones that make up the joint, Mark? Your ulna and your humerus. What's the moving bone here, and what's the shape of it? Ulna's moving, the shape is concave. Apply the rule. It's going to slide in the same direction as the swing and roll. From here to here, it's an anterior swing, anterior roll, anterior slide. From here to here, superior wing, superior swing, superior roll, superior slide. Hip joint. What are the 2 bones that make up the joint? Femur and the innominate bones that make up the acetabulum. Cool. What's the shape of the moving bone? In this case, the femur is the moving bone, and it's convex in shape. Cool. Apply the rule. From here to here is an anterior swing, therefore anterior roll, convex surface, posterior glide, because opposite direction movement. That is it. So now let's go back to this guy that came in to see you, and he can't bring his shoulder up more than here. And you say to yourself, why does that happen? 1, could it be weak deltoids? Cool. Let me go test those for strength. Could it be the inability of the adductors to abduct? Cool. Let me go do a muscle length test. Is it component motion? Is the the SC joint not moving properly? The scapulothoracic joint not moving properly? Go mobilize and see if they move well. Does the humerus not slide where it's supposed to? It's supposed to slide inferiorly because this is supposed to be a superior swing roll. Mobilize it and see if there's space in the inferior portion of the joint capsule, or see if it's really restricted. That's what they don't do with you in school with range of motion. What do? They say active range of motion. Are they willing to move? Is it limited? Is it excessive? Is there pain? That's it. And then you go, okay, it's limited. And there's pain. Then you're left going, I don't know what this means. Versus what we just did here, right? Just like the mechanic with my braking system. Recognize all parts of the range of motion, recognize all parts of my braking system, and then now assess each of those things individually because they're all variables, and go figure out which ones of these variables are the problem. And there may be more than one. And therefore, we create a treatment intervention based on that. Better yet, we further test. We find that the joint capsule is the problem. Go do some further testing for the joint capsule. Are we cool with this idea?